Hello, hello. All right, so I am wanting to talk about one of probably the primary split in the feminine. And this exists within women, it exists within our culture, and it also exists in our perception of the divine. In the beginning, the feminine was the all that is. She was the profound integrity of being. She was the purity of intention. She was the mother that was also terrible and devouring and erotic. She was maiden, mother, crone. She was witch, and she was wife. She was the fusion of paradox. That's one of the qualities of the feminine, is that she holds paradox. She is a both and. Through the implementation of patriarchal perspectives and values, a split happened in the feminine. And that split was of the virgin and the harlot. So there was a reorientation towards the value of what is good and wanted and celebrated in the feminine as being the virgin, and that which is deemed unholy. Through Abrahamic religion, we actually get that these qualities of the feminine are unholy, wrong, and even evil. I'm naming that as the harlot. She could also be called the wild woman. She's a part of that that sphere of embodiment, and the witch. This split created a shadow in women, and really in all of us, because we all have feminine and masculine within us. And I want to talk about the virgin harlot split in regarding persona and shadow. So persona, you can think of the ego as being both persona and shadow. Persona being all that we have been conditioned to believe is good. The persona is our winning formula. It's what we have been rewarded for being. It's what we have been told is the right way to be. Our social definition of self. And again, in this context of virgin harlot, for most of us, this has started to change as women have gained more liberation. But for most of us, we've been conditioned to believe that the qualities of the virgin are those that are desired, and we've sought to emulate that. What gets pushed into shadow is those behaviors that we've been told are wrong, those behaviors that we've been told are unholy and bad and even evil. So again, persona and shadow is something that exists within the psyche of all human beings in the context of this polarity between the feminine. Most often, it is the harlot that got pushed into shadow, and all of the qualities that she holds. So wildness and eroticism and rage, these qualities of woman, of the feminine, became suppressed. Now, what happens when we suppress aspects of ourselves is that there's a fracturing of the self. There's a loss of authenticity and vitality, and we get trapped in that persona way of being. We become a narrowed expression of ourself. And the shadow is like, it's like holding a balloon underwater. We can't actually disconnect from it. It will continue to pop up and arise because it is also a part of ourselves. And so that's why it actually doesn't work to think that we can just say no to an aspect of being. to deny our anger or our rage or our sexuality doesn't actually go anywhere, and it will come out in unconscious ways of being, such as passive aggressivism or acting out our sexual deviance in ways that are actually unhealthy and problematic to our being. So one of the key elements of working with the sacred feminine is to reclaim that which lies in shadow, so that we have access to all of ourselves, to all of our being. And what I find fascinating about the feminine is that although you can kind of track the patriarchal split in the sense that for the most part, it's the virgin qualities that have been valued. And so therefore the rewarding goes into qualities of purity, of goodness, and we can lean into those of obedience, of being the good wife. Through the development and even the revolution of the feminine, there has also been a pushback against that role. There's been a pushback against the virgin, which begins to push her into shadow. And so there are also women, and I would even include myself in this category, that because of what I saw being how I was being conditioned and how I was being told to behave, I actually acted in rebellion to it. And so my persona became one of the wild woman, and I pushed the virgin into shadow. So the problem with this is that it's not actually a whole or clean expression of the wholeness of my being and the wholeness of your being. It's in tension with that which you have placed in shadow. And particularly because women have been told to be so many things, often in contrasting ways. And I think of that Cynthia Nixon video in which it's like, be thin, but not too thin, be sexy, but not too sexy. It's like we get this constant double bind. And so actually all aspects of the feminine can be partially in persona and partially in shadow. And then it is our work to explore and reclaim them. So I like working with these frameworks because they are so big and relatable, and they give us something to hold on to as we then dive into our reclamation. Now, why would we do the work of shadow work? Shadow work feels like it's a buzzword these days. And the reason that it is valuable is that our true state is divine. Our true state is that we are whole. We are born. We are divine beings. Our humanness is unified with the divine. And yet through our human experience, we become wounded. And in that woundedness, we become fractured. And that's the creation, the split of persona and shadow. And in this example of virgin and harlot. In that separating from the aspects of self, we lose contact with our true authentic being. And we take on a limited vantage point. And it's that limited vantage point that blocks the perception of who we truly are, the fullness of our divine being. So the act of shadow work is to enter in through the wound. It is to enter in right to the point of our shame, that aspect of our being that we have been told is wrong, is bad, is deviant, and fearlessly step into the darkness and meet that aspect of ourself. And in that meeting with self, the self transforms, or rather it reveals the truth of its being, offering to us its nectar, its medicine, its gold. So all aspects of ourself have both healthy and unhealthy expressions. There are healthy expressions of the virgin, and there are unhealthy expressions of the virgin. There are healthy expressions of the harlot, and there are unhealthy expressions of the harlot. And that discernment is necessary if we are actually going to make ourselves whole, because it is true that there's a level of being that actually is deviant and unhealthy and harmful to us. just as there is a level of chastity that can limit us as well and be unhealthy and restrictive and blocking off our life force. So the act of reclaiming the self is the practice that brings us into the felt experience of our own divinity. It is one of the most deepest spiritual practices that we can enter into. To enter into the wound, to meet our dismembered parts, and to meet them and recognize them as holy and receive and reclaim the gift that we have cut off from ourselves. This is the act of becoming holy, but it is also the way to step into our true authenticity. For when we're fractured, we become this sliver dimension of who we actually are. So if we are to receive the vitality and nourishment and that clarity of being, that actual true integrity that the Virgin holds, the symbol of integrity, that integrity comes by coming into deep alignment with who we actually are and having access to all expressions of ourselves so that we can bring sacred rage online when it is necessary, so that we have access to the erotic current, how it wants to flow through us and meet life, and also so that we can hold with impeccability our integrity and our goodness and bring purity into all our acts. So this is the juiciest and most powerful work that I know how to enter into. It is a reclamation of the feminine within, but as we do it for ourselves, we also do it in service to the world. And we step back into the way of being, which is that fusion of paradox, which is the both and, which is the sweet spot. Not the sweet spot, it is the, but it is so sweet. It is just the truth of divinity. The divine is all that is, and that necessarily contains paradox, and we are divine beings, and so we necessarily contain paradox. So this is the deepest work of healing. It is the work of becoming whole. It is the work of remembering who we truly are and reclaiming our divinity by reclaiming all of our parts, all of our humanness. So that is my intro both to persona and shadow and the Virgin Harlot Split, and just inviting you to reflect on, where do you tend to align? What are the qualities that you identify with? Have you identified more with the Virgin? Has there been a sense of of feeling like the good girl, of pursuing that, like some of the signs of women who identify more with the good girl is like getting really good grades in school and obeying the rules and dressing professionally and even having a professional career, or being a good wife and a good mother. Those are some of the qualities of the Virgin. And it may be that you identify more with the harlot or the wild woman, and that embracing of the divine chaos. And for me, it showed up as festival culture and Burning Man, which I'm still going to later this month, and eroticism. So it's always beautiful to look at where you feel the most comfortable and then notice what you judge in others, and also what you judge in yourself. For that's the clue into what you may be suppressing. And what I find so juicy is that, again, it's the wound, it's the pain point, it's the judgment that actually becomes the key. That is the doorway. That if you are courageous enough to seek truth and enter into those places of discomfort, what will be revealed is your true being, the allness of you. So this is the foundational work that I offer through my course, Imminent Rapture. As of 20 minutes ago, I only have one seat left. It is a deep dive into the feminine mysteries, and we really explore these polarities of the Virgin and the harlot, and how they